Has anyone here ever been a soldier fighting against the US? What was it like? My grandfather was conscripted to fight for the North Korean military during the Korean War. He was at the Battle of Incheon and he likened the dread that he felt to what one must feel when faced with a massive tidal wave that is about to engulf you and everyone you know. Couple this with the fact that many North Korean troops were told horror stories that the American troops were cannibals, for example, and that the average American Marine was much taller and more physically robust than the average North Korean soldier. You can imagine how scared he was. He said that the Chinese and North Korean units were absolutely obliterated, and that they never stood a chance against the Marines. All his words, not mine. I was just a 7-year-old kid when my parents were watching CNN BBC while I was playing video games. It was about some army jets taking off during the night. My dad turned to me and said something along the lines, "It has begun. Get to the basement now." Some time later the first explosions could be heard. The NATO US bombing of Serbia in 1999 had started. I remember spending time in the basement with other residents. I remember how the building shook when the bombs exploded. The fear of what was coming after the sirens went off. They destroyed all 3 bridges across the Danube in my city, cutting us off from a part of our family. One day a bomb hit the refinery so we couldn't stay in the basements anymore because of CO2. Then a bomb hit about 100 meters from our building and shrapnel went through the blinds and windows and embedded itself into the opposite wall of our neighbor's flat. That was when we decided to move somewhere where the Americans had nothing to aim for, a smaller town. We were safer there, but we could still hear the jets flying above us and bombs going off in the distance. When someone shot down the F-117 stealth jet, it was a huge freak yeah moment for Serbia. That's my short story of surviving a war versus USA. I remember the same things, only it wasn't NATO shooting at us but our countrymen. As you say, only the tactical targets, of course. Hopefully this won't get buried, but my hopes are not too high. My father was a sniper during the bombardment in Yugoslavia, and my best friend's father was a member of the elite unit called Tigers while the war in Kosovo was raging. I'll be short because I have to sleep, but my father told me it was like trying to repel a wave on the beach by building a castle out of sand. You fought. You may have won some small encounters, be it by accident or pure luck, but you always knew that if they wanted they could just kill us all and be done with it. Not a nice time for Yugoslavia, that's for sure. Former active army infantry here. Not sure how I'd feel if I met someone who told me they were former JAM. There were dozens of different armed groups fighting each other and fighting the coalition forces at the same time. My first deployment, it was mostly the Mali army. On the one hand, a lot of them were poor unemployed kids with zero prospects for employment or education. The only possible option for them was to grab a rifle and show up with the rest of the ski masks and run into coaxial machine gun fire, or dig a hole for $20 and get blown apart by an Apache. So I have some empathy for the plight of the poor, uneducated, unemployed Shiite youth who took up arms to fight the imperialist stormtrooper invaders. Sure, yeah, if Red Dawn happened, I'd be in the woods with the Wolverines too. Roger that. On the other hand, kidnappings, torture, rape, execution, burning the Sunnis out of their homes, corruption of the police force, the 3 dead preteens we found kidnapped, tortured and murdered, the 10-year-old kid shot in the head right in front of me by a sniper, the 90+ civilian murder victims we found just in the first month of our combat tour, the kid whose tongue they cut out because he liked to chat with us when we rolled by his neighborhood, the fact that Muqtada al-Sadr is now an officially recognized member of the Iraqi government. So yeah, I can't do it. I can't forgive them. My cousin Javier was in Fallujah in 2004 with the army and says it was a logistical clusterfuck sometimes. He told me about having to kill kids barely in their teens. That dude is all sorts of fricked up. The army was there first. Out of everyone in this post, you probably have the most complete grasp of what went down in the opening years of that war. My great uncle fought on the German side of World War II. He fought all over the place. Africa, Italy, a small stint in Russia, and he defended France from the D-Day invasion. He was later able to move to the United States as a war refugee. He said that all of his officers would constantly tell him, when you're fighting the Americans you must think of the least probable way they will attack you, because that will be the way that they attack you. He also said that when you were fighting Americans more so than any other country's army he fought, you had to have eyes in the back of your head. Thank you for sharing. I always find it more than impressive to hear of soldiers who fought on more than one front in World War II. Both of my grandfathers were on the German side for World War II. They didn't say much about the Americans until after the war, and how helpful they were rebuilding Germany and donating chocolate to kids and etc. But both sets of grandparents told horror stories about facing the Russians. Seems they were pee at the scorched earth they had to do to defeat the German push, and made them pay dearly and daily. They emigrated to the US because they ran so far west, getting as far away from the Russians as possible. Considering the Russians treated the German front as a meat grinder for their own men, this is probably to be expected. Drown them in bodies would probably be a fitting motto. My great uncle was on the Italian side in World War II and was a captured POW to America. From what he told me, people wanted to be captured by the US. They were treated badly by their own, and how great America was. In World War II, the Germans, and some of our allies, often commented on how chaotic the US Army appeared to be. I believe the quote was, "War is chaos, and the American Army practices it on a daily basis." Other armies were slow, disciplined, methodical, etc. The perception was that Americans were unpredictable, undisciplined but prone to ingenuity. Not just our generals but right down to the grunt soldier level. I understand most who fought us viewed this as a great strength. Gonna be buried, but oh well. My dad was an anti-aircraft gunner in Hanoi during the Vietnam War. He still wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, quite often really. I'm an American soldier, so I'm not what you're looking for, but I'm guessing you won't find much on here, so I'll give you an analogy from some evasion training I got when getting ready for less visible operations. We were learning how to escape if you're being chased, and one of the things we trained for was trackers using dogs. The dog handlers explained it like this: look, the dogs we use are so good at what they do, so perceptive that they will find you. You won't be able to fool that dog, so you need to fool the handler. Travel in erratic patterns, backtrack, make it seem to the handler that the dog has lost the scent and is just wandering. You can't beat the dog, but you might be able to beat the man. That is what fighting the US military is like. If the man behind the dog has decided you're the enemy, you've already lost. There are many brave fighters out there, on our side and against us. But when it comes down to it, we are going to win in a direct fight. Sure, bad things happen and we lose a battle here and there, but in a war we will win. The trouble is that the world is learning. No one wants to fight us in a war anymore. They don't go after the dog, they go after the man behind the dog. Jack up the cost of the conflict, cause civilian casualties, force us into lose-lose situations, and our support crumbles. Then our handlers say, okay boy, we're not finding him today. Let's go home. Well said. It'd be kinda hard to face all of those wrecks to respond to this. 1. Be a soldier. 2. Be in a country against the US. 3. Be in actual combat. 4. Survive it. 5. Go on Reddit and find this post. +6. Want to write a response. While I cannot speak from experience, I'm an American. I can relay something my father mentioned to me a few years ago. He was a Marine during the conflict in Grenada, and he was also active during the First Gulf War. He has never gone into great detail about his combat history, and frankly I wouldn't want to have him rewalk those memories, but he did mention one time how you can see a man's fear before you see him. Kind of cryptic, I know, but that one statement says a lot. He mentioned how you could hear them yelling and that the yells were not the confident kind. He meant that these men knew they were about to fight Americans, with all their fancy toys and extreme training. They knew that the Marines were coming to kill them. My dad always told me that one of the greatest weapons our military has is the image that we conjure in the minds of our enemies. While it is one thing to fight someone who you feel is an equal or lesser match to you, it is a completely different scenario to fight someone who you truly feel is a monstrous force of war. I can't speak for the other branches strictly because I don't have a close personal relationship with someone who is enlisted, and I have never enlisted. However, I can tell you that my father, and all of his Marine buddies, are absolutely vicious if prodded into an aggressive situation. They knew that the Marines were coming to kill them. If I recall correctly, in Grenada the Marines were only supposed to take the top 10% of the island and the army the rest. The Marines landed and began their attack. At the end the Marines held about 90% of the island and the army the rest. The OPFA were fleeing from the Marines to fight the army. I am actually former US Army. I spent an entire summer serving as an OPFA, opposing force, at one of the Army's elite training center. Basically, I fought US soldiers in a giant simulation. I'd actually agree to some extent with the pushover comments for some units. The US Army is just so dang massive, some units certainly will look completely incompetent. Also, outside of a few soft units and light infantry, there isn't a whole lot of emphasis placed on toughness. However, combat arms units are no freaking joke. We have the best, most expensive training in the world and by far the best equipment. I would not want to be on the other team. Chances are I'd be dead before I even saw an American soldier. If you were Geronimo, frick you and your body breeches. My great-grandfather talked to me about being a Canadian in World War II. When a Canadian plane flew overhead, the Germans dove for cover. When a German plane flew overhead, the Canadians dove for cover. When an American plane flew overhead, everybody dove for cover. This will probably be buried, but my great uncle fought for the Germans in the Battle of Normandy. He said that they were told that the Allies were being pushed back into the sea and that any allies they saw were most likely small units that had slipped by. A few days later my great uncle woke up to find a regiment of Americans camped within sight of the farmhouse they were in. Him and his squad surrendered. Hey, my great uncle landed on the beach. He was a medic, and one of 4 soldiers in his company that made it from the beach to the end of the war. All the people whining about how this is pointless because the Taliban don't go on Reddit seem to forget that Iraq has internet, and while they may not have all agreed with the war, some fought for Saddam. Maybe they want to say something? Also, Serbia, Somalia, Grenada, Desert Storm I, Vietnam, and then there are instances of friendly fire. I'm sure it isn't any less scary just because it's an accident. Maybe even an Argentinian who fought the British has special insight. It would still be an account of fighting a massive Western military. I have a girlfriend from Iraq who had brothers in the Iraq army. They defected pretty quick and live here now, but they tell me how insane the American arsenal was. While Iraq soldiers' main method of transport was pickup trucks, motorbikes and bicycles, the Americans were transporting people in armored personal carriers that were impossible to damage. Also tells me that their quality of training was noticeable, as you would never see the Americans, you would just be shot because they knew how to move from cover to cover and remain undetected. Her brothers never killed anyone. They defected once troops entered the country. They were only 16 at the time. I am currently in the US Army right now, so I'll do my best just to describe what I see. The basic way of looking at it is the people we fight know that there is no way they could ever beat the US military. It's just too big and too technologically superior. However, their goal is to never win. It's impossible. You can't beat us in a stand-up fair fight. So to counter this, they just make their goal to not lose. And while it is impossible to win against American forces, it is very easy to not lose. Whether it be a country like Russia and China or a group of rebels like the Taliban, they all understand to not try to beat us. Just counter us. They adopt countering tactics to deny us all of our superior traits. They know they can't outmaneuver us, so they use IEDs and mines to deny us freedom of maneuver. They can't gain air superiority, so they develop anti-air missiles to shoot our planes down. They can't beat our navy, so instead of wasting money building huge ships, they build missiles. China just developed an anti-carrier missile. In Afghanistan they can't build a stable government, so they just try to undermine ours. The basic fact is eventually the American public will get sick of war and decide it's time to go home. All they have to do is wait, and they will win every time. America hasn't lost any wars. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, they are all the same. We kill thousands, maybe millions. It doesn't matter, so we just go home. We no longer win wars. We just don't lose them. Eventually we will go home tired. Does getting bombed attacked by allied US troops count on this one? If so, I'll try to get in touch with some old military buddies to post here. This comment scares and confuses me. Yeah, This is the closest I've got to an answer. My family is Panamanian. Being a civilian in a country invaded by US troops is terrifying. Tanks stopped in front of my grandma's house and started firing over it once. My cousins were all really young when it happened and they were absolutely terrified. Unfortunately, I don't have access to someone who may have fought for Noriega, the dictator at the time that the US was ousting. From Iraq here. My father fought on the defensive lines in Iraq during the Gulf War when the West forces entered Iraq. He said it was very scary to have planes fly over. You do not see them when they are coming because they are very fast, so damage and deaths happen with no warning. Planes were followed by soldiers, but he did not get close to them. He said everyone knew the fighting was pointless because Saddam was not a good leader, and he thought he was. Saddam thought he could fight back, but UN had better leaders and more tools. My father told me it was like fighting bad disease because you don't know what you are fighting and you don't know how to fight it. Not the enemy but was in communications. We would get intel from counter-intel guys from intercepted cell phone calls. Taliban was scared shitless when it came to engaging Marines. One report that I remember well was a commander ordering guys to engage in firefights cause they wanted to do a show of force. The guy he was ordering gave a million excuses and was scared of the new Marines cause they thought we were special forces. We had a bunch of new gear, chest rigs, radios, thermals. They ended up engaging a patrol later that week. We killed most of their cell that day. Like many commenting here, I didn't fight against the US, but fought for it. I remember seeing a man, an enemy I guess, die a fairly pointless death, though I was at a comfortable distance I suppose. I can't confirm it, but I know he was a man with a hungry family who was paid a bigger sum to take shots at the Iraqi police. They mowed down his house. There's quite a bit I still carry with me from Al-Anbar province, though it has been years. I suppose part of me always understood how fundamentally unfair life can be, but never as much as when I was over there. Now every yellow ribbon and thank you for your service carries a residual guilt that I have difficulty communicating. I'd like to think that if I could remake the world, it wouldn't be as such. After all, what would I do in his place? Probably the same. The world is full of decent men in indecent situations. I suppose the worst part is the inability to effect any meaningful change. TLDR, aimed at all a mother. My great uncle flew A6M0, Zeke, fighter aircraft for the Japanese Imperial Navy. He survived one attack on an American carrier task force but was wounded and relegated to light duty in China. He described the first time seeing the US fleet, circa 1944, as both awe-inspiring and extremely disheartening. Simply the futility of trying to fight the US. I actually gave a talk on this topic today, not just the US but basically on the losing side. I suppose I'd sum it up: the winners write history. I guess the end result of facing an army like the US, a technological monster, is you're not going to be the one writing that history book. Currently in Berlin and I just get my group, ORSAS Canada etc., to imaging no war memorials in their towns, no Veterans Day, no Anzac Day, no parades, no walls listing the dead, and then I remind them that for a large proportion of soldiers here during WW1/WW2 it wasn't they were evil, it was they were, in their minds, fighting for their home the same as our grandfathers and great-grandfathers. We get to remember our dead soldiers, to raise them up as heroes. Those that lose don't. It's a strange but powerful thing to be allowed to remember. Please do not take this as me trying to lessen the atrocities committed during World War II. I actually played paintball against US Marines once. It was scary stuff. They were in New Zealand as embassy guards and completely destroyed us on the attack. However, they couldn't play defend the flag very well. Haha. I read an interview of an Al-Qaeda member fighting against the Syrian army in Aleppo. He came across the border from Iraq where he was a veteran from fighting US troops there. He basically said they were all lucky they were fighting the Syrian army, because if it was America they would have all been killed by drones, helicopters, and precision bombs a long time ago. He said Americans always know what is happening because of the drones. satellite pictures, well-developed communications between units, etc. The Syrian army is in the dark all the time, so they fire artillery and drop bombs semi-randomly. I have a neighbor from Vietnam that participated in the Vietnam War. He told me most of the time he was on the run and hiding in trees waiting to shoot at US soldiers. After an ambush, his group would get the frick out as they didn't want to get torched. Moons ago, I had a father-in-law that was part of the German paratroopers during World War II. He was taken as a POW during the Battle of the Bulge and sent to a camp in England. He said that with the level of fighting he engaged in, he was scared and he did not think he was going to make it out alive. That is what they were told. The Allied forces would not allow them to surrender. They will shoot them no matter what. He was captured when he was discovered hiding in a building. He said he had no time to react and it was get shot to death or give up. He said he was treated very well in his POW camp. He has since died, but he was a colorful guy. He chalked it up to a countryman called into service of his country during that time. He had a lot of stories about Germany during that time. It was an interesting perspective. US military officer here. Fighting us would be terrifying for two reasons. The fact that we do not fight fair and that we employ overwhelming firepower. Foreign military officers that I've worked with assume that they will take the first hit from the enemy and then respond. Americans rarely allow this to happen, and the amount of detailed planning that goes into any attack is ridiculous. We can plan down to the second what weapon is hitting you from where, and we use every weapon at our disposal. Take a USMC for instance. If you're getting attacked by one, you're getting hit with 501,000 lbs. Bombs dropped by aircraft. Then they'll open up on you with guns. Then the Hellas will fire missiles and their guns. Then 155mm artillery. Then 81mm mortars. Then 60mm. Then .50 caliber machine guns and Mk19 grenade launchers. Then maybe AT-4 and small rocket launchers. Then M240G and M249 SAW machine guns. All of this just to cover the advance of the grunts. By the time our grunts reach you, you're either dead or scared shitless. They're fresh, fully loaded, and ready for you. And American grunts are not just any infantrymen. I'm sorry, but they're not. They have the highest morale, are in the best physical condition, have thousands of hours of training behind them, and they want to kill you. They're not just willing to kill you, they want to kill you. Even when we're not doing a classic attack, we don't fight fair. In Iraq there were 3 guys with AK-47s waiting to ambush one of my patrols. The whole battalion, 500 guys, was out that day and we could have steamrolled them. Instead, the Battle Space Owner Tactical Operations Center pushed me a Cobra and Huey, 2 combat helicopters versus 3 guys with rifles. I know you wanted perspectives of those that have fought us, but I thought I'd lay down what I thought. I've been in a long time, 12 years, and I've worked with a lot of foreign forces. In a straight up fight, it's amazing what we can do. I'm glad I don't have to face it from the other side. Scrolled through this entire thread and didn't find a single person who could describe firsthand what it's like to fight American troops. Now that's military efficiency. Whenever I see the Blue Angels fly, I wonder what it must feel like knowing that those things are coming for you. It must be a hopeless feeling. Fellow teachers, who have been teaching for decades, tell me about their experiences with Southeast Asian refugee students they had. All of the other students were excited for Fleet Week. The Southeast Asian refugee students dove for cover as soon as they heard the jets. The last time they heard them, their world burned. When I was in Afghanistan with the 82nd, the first few patrols outside the wire at Brew and real crappy cop that no longer exists, right in the middle of Taliban territory, never was really attacked, just no purpose to maintaining it. Didn't get much anything at all from the locals, so they asked the Terps what the deal was. Patrol was told that the locals were afraid of them. Why? Well, they saw the double A's and believed that we had to kill our mothers to get into the 82nd Airborne. We did not disabuse them of that notion. So imagine that you are going up against a bunch of men, in armor, weapons, and uniforms, and they carry their weapons at the low ready and are on constant vigil. You believe these men are so ruthless and driven that they killed their mothers just to join a unit. Now, take a shot at one. Go ahead, I dare you. Because, as is said in The Usual Suspects, how do you shoot the devil in the back? What if you miss? Because if you don't wipe us out quickly, we'll stomp you. We don't retreat from ambushes. We fricking kill the ambushers. We don't give a crap. We'll attack through their line. Because it sure as crap beats not killing the suckers. Source: Artilleryman in the 82nd. May not be the same thing, but my family thought the Americans indirectly for over 100 years. I am from Northern Ireland and most people probably know a little about the conflict over here. What many people don't know is that many Americans supported and heavily funded the IRA. That's right, the America who are currently in a war against terror, who hate terrorists, who oppose freedom and peace, funded the once most powerful terrorist organization in the world. Many rant over the IRA were better equipped than the UVF mainly due to American money. The fighting was difficult for my family and their fellow soldiers. I don't know how many members of my family were killed by the IRA, but it was a good number. It was real shame. Unlike a lot of the paramilitary, my family were good people just interested in protecting their families and communities. If America hadn't supported the IRA, the war would have been far less bloody. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.